Welcome to Elise and Nick. Thank you for joining me today. This is the first of these debate series. We're going to be looking at the impact of, in effect, what is a ban on grassroots sports so far. So, guys, thanks very much. And I suppose the first question really is, what's been the impact on you personally?
So yeah, it's been. I don't think it could have. Well, I don't want to make out that I'm somehow in the worst position of anyone. But the impact that I've had is more than I could have ever imagined. I helped run despite being an Exeter, I helped run a rugby union club back home, and I'm club captain of rugby league at the moment at the university, and both the seasons have been completely wiped out for competitive fixtures. It's been kind of a death by a thousand cuts. It's slowly but surely there's been moments of hope. I know, Harry, you'll definitely know in terms of the RFU how much at grassroots level there's been assurances that play is going to start, and then as the date approaches and cases go up, it then gets pushed further back, and then again as cases drop again, there's new hope that it's going to come back. But yeah, in the last week we've seen Bucks be fully cancelled, and that'll be the back page on the 25th of January. So look out for that. And we've also had grassroots rugby has effectively been cancelled. I mean, it hasn't, but Nat 1 and Nat 2 have been, the people running those leagues have been informed that that's not going to happen. So you'd assume that grassroots rugby will follow. That's about it.
The same, to tell you the truth. So I'm obviously part of the women's rugby team. We had a bit of stop-start at the beginning as well, so we had kind of a phased return in for pre-season, like 6-person meetings, and we gradually built up, and we were just beginning to be able to work in some contact when lockdown 2 happened, it's all the way back again, and then we weren't allowed to resume afterwards. And yeah, like Nick, we found out Bucks has been cancelled completely. I think that the second team were informed that no Bucks was going to be happening from that end from the start. So it was only going to be the first team. So that was a bit rubbish for them as well. But now it's everyone.
Yeah, because I know before Christmas, I'm going to say, annoyingly for everyone watching this, all three of us are involved in rugby, so that's going to be where the bulk of the info comes from. Super Rugby was aiming to get underway mid-February, and again, like you guys have said, it's just been completely chucked out of the water. I suppose, like, obviously I can speak on behalf of the players for the uni men's ones team, like the number of them as well that, like, for this year would have been their final year playing at that level as well, and some of them that have got aspirations of making it semi-pro or pro, trying to put themselves in the shop window, it's less than ideal.
Yeah, and it's so damaging as well for people's careers. I mean, sporting careers, young people's sporting careers potentially. When you think that it can be, I mean, the people that you work with, certainly Harry, it can be one unbelievable season at the age of whatever. I mean, whether it's that age as in uni age or earlier, as is normally the case, that people are going to miss out on the chance to have had. One unbelievable season that elevates you into an academy or into from the men's ones at Exeter into into Chiefs, and then obviously with women's rugby as well. That probably is even more common in the women's ones teams. People being elevated into the amount of women's rugby players that are now playing that play for Exeter that are now playing in the Premier 15s is great, and you worry that people have been denied to have that opportunity, particularly final years, but hopefully they'll be able to do something to give themselves a chance of getting on the ladder.
I mean, it would be really interesting to see the statistics on how many people come back for a panic matter.
Yeah, definitely. Because I mean, like, again, I'll just use the uni as an example. A good half a dozen of the players this season came back on masters. Obviously, A for the degree, and it helps, but with that idea of seeing that step as well. And it's people like Harry Bazalgette, Joe Elderkin, who've been like mainstays in that team. It's just so detrimental to them trying to get themselves in that shop window, like Nick was saying.
Yeah, I think that from the women's rugby team as well, that there's quite a lot of playing for both sides at the moment. So Jess Thomas, Marion Doyd, obviously, they're still part of the university, they're still part of the women's rugby club, but they're not allowed to cross-contaminate, I suppose you call it. So while they're playing for Chiefs, they can't come and train for us, even when restrictions are lifted, because that kind of mixing into the Premiership wouldn't be allowed. So it's significantly cut those girls off from us as well.
Yeah, and I mean, moving on then, looking a little bit in terms of stretching it out towards the lack of funding, that's going to have a major impact. I mean, I was very sad and I looked and did a little bit of like research on it. There's been since March 700 million fewer visits, as in like fewer people at fewer individual exercises than you would expect. So like that's turning up and training on a Tuesday, turning up and playing on a Saturday, and that's just obviously like those grassroots clubs. They need that money, they need that revenue and income to survive.
Yeah, I mean, you know, it's never been grassroots funding from a rugby perspective. It's never been as well distributed as it could be. And though they had a good bump after the World Cup, their continued spending on other expenses at the same level led them to get into a debt, which now, I mean, it's very bleak, the picture for grassroots funding, because even the money that has been provided by the government was provided, I think, in December, was enough to get them through to the end of the pandemic. But beyond that, it's really it's not a good picture. It's been nice that they've managed to at least keep the top tier leagues for men's and women's rugby going, but below that they've got some real problems, and they've always had structural problems. And there's a number of things, you know, beyond sports governing bodies. There's a number of things that have been sliding towards a slow death, if you like, and COVID's accelerated that. So you hope out of the ashes that better ideas and better ways of giving funding to grassroots clubs will emerge. But in the recent future, it's going to be very, very, very difficult for certain clubs to survive.
And just on that as well, then looking at it from the university perspective, what's that been like for the rugby league team this year with the funding situation?
Well, it's been okay. I mean, we from our sort of, we set out early on, we charged much lower fees than we typically do, on the, you know, just on the basis that we definitely weren't going to be back before the end of term one, and then we would, by the time we get to December, we would over the holidays be starting to talk about top-up fees to cover all the associated costs with bucks and additional training costs for term two. And obviously, I mean, when I was ready to sit down with committee and have those discussions, that was when we had the uptick in cases, and sort of immediately after the second lockdown, where things started to get completely out of control. And then by the time I was going to get around to doing it, it just suddenly, you know, reality set in. And it's going to be tough for a number of clubs, particularly the clubs that play indoor sports, because they've had so little opportunity to train and stuff. They'll hopefully be able to get their refund stuff right, because I'm confident they'll get the right support from the AU, but and Fixer, who'll be involved in that as well. But what's really challenging and worrying for them is about getting any membership next year, because second and third year membership is so important, particularly when it's hard to see next year people standing on Forum Hill and being able to get freshers in that way, because obviously all clubs have seen fewer freshers than they usually would. So that's the real worry, I think, and I think the financial problems will be mitigated by it only being one season, but that it's the recruitment side of things I think is going to be the real challenge within the university for sure.
Yeah, I think that actually the cultures of clubs will shift massively next year because of that. With third years or final years leaving, freshers who have joined but not had the usual experience or the same amount of training, same access to facilities and coaching and everything, that I think a lot of clubs will find themselves having to almost rebuild that culture, not having the legacy carried on through second years.
Yeah, and I mean, like Nick was saying, obviously with the smaller clubs, well, I play korfball, I've played it at the uni, I play it for a team outside of the university now, and those indoor sports are just on their knees. They just can't even get in, and you need those indoor facilities, and it's just, like Nick said, it's just extra thing on top of extra thing to make it almost impossible to actually be able to play those sports. And those smaller sports, those niche sports, that's going to be the challenge, is trying to keep awareness of them and the fact they even exist. So moving on then, looking at the next topic, I suppose it's the $1 million question really, is it worth it? Do the benefits outweigh the risks, or is physical activity, sport, team sports and that social thing more important in the grand scheme of things?
I personally think that it doesn't. I think that it's a choice on what you choose to prioritize and what you choose to consider to be essential. Because a lot, essential shops staying open. There's been a lot of stuff about how fast food is staying open and that sort of thing. But gyms aren't being allowed, and a kickabout's not allowed, and all of these different things. I think it's a consistent choice to prioritize business over personal well-being, basically. And it's about what you're prioritizing, and is mental health and physical health just as important as the economy? I would be prone to say yes.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I think there was an inadequate preparation from sports governing bodies and from the government as to what would be an acceptable level of training if the pandemic were to get out of control again. And I think it was quite unfortunate that there wasn't any kind of provision for where sports facilities could come together, whilst in religious buildings there's been an incredible amount of work done behind the scenes, both by the government and by various different religious facilities, places of worship, to make sure that they have an acceptable social distancing for the moment where the pandemic was to get out of control again. And I think there's been a lack of foresight by, I don't know who by, to be fair, because I think a lot of the stage one return to play things, whether you look at the FA or the RFU or the RFL that I've seen, were all, it seemed like it would be hard for there to be a massive amount of transmission in those scenarios. But I think it's been seen consistently as something that's easy to stop and easy to cut. And when the prospect of competitive games goes out the window, I think people feel happy to just chop training as well. And I think that's been regrettable, but I think also inevitable in a way. I don't know what you would make of it, Harry. I mean, you've been involved probably the most, or with the most people that have had to react to news like that.
Yeah, I mean, like I said, it's been difficult for everybody. I mean, again, I've got some little stats and things here that I was looking at. You've got, on average, there's 3 million people in the UK that did this survey, and 3 million of them said that they were not going out and doing their once daily exercise that you're legally allowed. when actually before all of this, they'd be the sort of people that would be doing a good 5-6 hours a week. And that's the difficulty. And it's that motivation thing, really. I mean, personal experience, obviously, like I said, I'm not particularly good at them, but play rugby, korfball, squash, like any sport, you name it. And like, especially like some down Cowett Barton way, you go round the corner to the tennis courts, that notoriously socially distant sport, and they're locked up and you can't even go in and hit a ball back and forth with your housemates. And that's the challenging thing, and trying to juggle that, really.
And I think because in tennis, I think the argument behind stopping tennis is because it then creates the conditions for people to easily exploit the other rules. But if the police are going to spot people from separate households, whatever, embracing on a tennis court, they're more likely to see it on a tennis court than they are in a house. So I mean, tennis is the one where tennis and golf, I'd say, have been atrociously handled. I mean, those were the ones that you would feel like were so easy to have been able to keep going in some shape or form. And I mean, tennis is such a good way of exercising, and golf is very important to the mental health of many people. So I think that's been those have been handled very disappointingly. But I would say, for all that we've said, it is very difficult to continue team sports with big training sessions. And I think we obviously endeavoured as hard as we did, and we made sure we didn't allow people to, in our training sessions, to violate what we were supposed to be doing and the guidelines we were supposed to be doing. But it's easy for the government and for governing bodies to think that's very difficult to enforce for an entire training session. And again, I think there was just an inevitability about it. But yeah, I don't know. I mean, how would you two envisage a possible training session going, a team sport training session going during lockdown? Or have you had experience of that anyway?
Well, I think that, thinking about our pre-seasons, right, when we were transitioning into bigger and bigger training sessions, it very much was following the set stages and going through the 6-person, washing the ball, that sort of thing. And obviously now we can't do anything. But I think that, personally, just having that max amount of 6 people and being socially distanced and following all the regulations, that's how I would see it going. I think, like you said, obviously it's very difficult. I don't think that there can be full club training. I don't think there should be full club training, and there definitely shouldn't be any competitive playing. But I think that you have to have some give in certain areas, especially when it comes to mental well-being and everything. So I think that probably a controlled environment, 6 people would be the way that I would think about it.
Yeah, I mean, I tend to agree with the korfball. When we set that up, obviously we're not allowed in the buildings. We've had to do it outside on the fields. But that was 6 people at a time on a post, and then you'd have another 6 people on another post 20 metres away from us on the field. And again, you had individual balls that were washed, and I know it was very sort of hospitalised, if you like, of you could only use your set thing. You couldn't go and use other people's or pass a ball to each other, but at least you were still able to keep in that shooting. On korfball as a sport, you can keep your eye in at how to shoot, your technique, stuff like that. And similar to Elise, like it was a slow, gradual build up, so that I think the club I play for got 2 sessions in before they got locked down again. But they had 20 people max at a session. They were training with obviously changes to the rules. So people who've ever watched korfball as a sport, you're usually quite close together, especially if you're competing under the post. That element got removed, so you're only allowed 2 people within 2 meters of it, for example. But at least it kept the core basics of the sport. And I suppose that for me, that's the way, like Elise said, is that gradual build up. And okay, fair enough, you can't travel to Bristol to play a game at the moment. That's fair enough with the restrictions and the circumstances. But I think that build up and that gradual thing is important, especially for the whole well-being thing as well. Because for some people, those training sessions are their social setting as well, and that's what's being lost.
Yeah, managing risks. You walk down Exeposé Street now, or you walk down to the quay, you're going to pass people, unfortunately, nearly within 2 meters of you. It's pretty impossible to go through a setting like that, and yet you can't play tennis with someone, and almost that is a better situation than walking down a high street or going into a shop.
Yeah, I'll after you, Harry, if you were gonna.
Oh, that's all right. Go ahead.
I just to follow up on the tennis thing. I think that's a great point. I mean, when you compare it with alternatives, because if you allow people to play tennis, a large number of people, I obviously don't have any statistics to mind, but if you allow people to play tennis, it is a way of, it's literally in the sport for the two people to be able to interact, but to be socially distanced. And as long as you have one COVID officer on every site of tennis courts in the country, which wouldn't be that difficult to organise, you'd be able to keep it going and for people to socialise and to not resort to, going down and exercising whilst having a coffee together and sitting on a park bench right next to each other, or going to the shop together. I haven't heard any examples of that, but I imagine, particularly for people who live alone or who sort of have real cabin fever, that would be something that people would do. So yeah, I think that's been really poorly handled, and I think it's also a shame that, like I say, the effort hasn't been made a lot for sports to continue in any form whatsoever. But even very, very small groups and big clear divides across a field to make sure that there's no interaction between those groups. But in spite of all that, I also think it's been good that they've managed to keep the Premier 15s going as long as possible, because that would have been very easy to can as well. Because of the lack of testing, it would have been very easy to say, well, this is going to have to go. And it's been good to see them at least trying to stick to that and trying, because that is so important to at least have some women's rugby going ahead, for people to aspire to and for people to play, obviously.
Yeah, and I think on that, obviously one of the reasons for that 2-week circuit breaker, as much as I hate that term, has been for the RFU to start sourcing the funding for the Premier 15 clubs to get tested, just because they've got such small budgets. That's been the big difficulty, and obviously now that's getting introduced now, or this week it's supposed to be being introduced. Hopefully that will mean that, well, hopefully, fingers crossed, Exeter will be able to play Saracens on Saturday, and then the week after that, then the league will be able to carry on again. And that is so important, especially like Nick said, with like women's rugby, obviously, with obviously the stuff that's come out with like the eye care, with the trolls underneath the comments and sections and stuff as well. It's so important to show that it's what it is, which is at the same level, and it's really, really high quality. And you want to be showing that product as well as you can and getting as many people to watch it and engage as possible.
Yeah, and you know how kind of a lost generation of talent, or a lack of an influx and everything. I think that women's rugby is at the point where you need that exposure and you need that coverage to inspire young girls of any age to want to go into rugby and to want to try it out. And I think that it being stopped for those 2 weeks, though, hopefully, like you're saying, it's going to be coming back. But I do think that exposure is just key to the professionalisation and the improvement of women's rugby.
Yeah, completely. And again, like like we've been saying, it's those sports which, whether it's, like I said, a smaller sport or women's rugby, which is still trying to find its feet in terms of getting itself out there and on social media and live streams and stuff like that, it does come down to that lost generation of talent thing. Because I mean, if you've got a girl who's 8, 9 years old, or slightly younger, slightly older, and they're able to watch these games week in, week out, and see these people, see the likes of Emily Scarrett, or the Chiefs, if you're a local like West Country girl, see somebody from the area, or somebody like Kaylee Armstrong breaking through and getting into that team, it really does show you that you can get there. And that's, I suppose that's a mental health impact as well. Is that something else that's being taken away? Is those opportunities are being deprived for people? So I suppose we've kind of touched on it a little bit there, but it's the $1 million question then is what's the way forward with this? Because COVID's not going away. It's here to stay. It's a virus. So how do we start to manage this whilst also making sure that we manage physical and mental health with sport as well?
After you, Elise.
This is a big question. You can't put.
I think I'll talk to that one.
So, well, I think obviously you can look at it and we can talk about what you think the government should be doing better and how they could have better handled it, right? We don't have control over that. So, you know, we can kind of talk until the cows come home about these. But from a manageable point, a local point, I think that clubs need to be making sure that they are keeping in contact with their players. I think they need to be communicating with their players. Hope is a really big thing, you know. It's a bit more difficult with us now. Bucks is cancelled because I think even though we had the second lockdown and decreased training and whatever, that we were always working towards something. And I think now, especially with the university not having Bucks anymore, you kind of think, especially for final years, kind of what am I working towards? Like, I don't know if I'm ever going to get that back. And everything's very uncertain at the moment. So I think that the only thing that clubs can do is just communicate effectively about what's going on, what the updates are, but also from a mental health perspective, keeping in contact with those players and on an individual basis, you know, whether or not you think someone's struggling, it's really important to reach out to people and just to check in on how they are, because in a training environment, you can notice if people are down or if they're slightly off, and you can have a chat with them afterwards or whatever. You don't have that contact now. So I think on an individual basis, making sure you're checking in with your mates.
Yeah, I think it'll be really interesting to see what happens afterwards. I think it's obviously massively important that there's a vaccine renewal strategy every year, which means that we don't head into the winter months as a country struggling with cases. But you know, I think that's obviously it's integral to everything. So grassroots sport, for, you know, obviously it's the most important thing for me, but compared to other things, not necessarily. But I think, you know, it's important. You know, just over 30,000 cases were recorded today, which is the lowest that we've seen new daily cases since the 19th of December. So things are going in the right direction. I think it's a real shame. There is a lot of logistics that goes into Bucks, which caused a decision to be taken so early. But I think it's a real shame, because I honestly believe we are going to look on the 3rd of March, which is a date that collision sports were due to start, and the 17th/24th of February, when all other sport was supposed to start. I honestly think we'll look on that day and the situation will be a lot better than it was when Bucks made the decision that they did. But at the same time, that also means that this should be the final big blow to be suffered. So looking forward, I think it's going to be really positive. I think the summer of cricket and all other summer sports, you know, that we've already touched on, will be hopefully unaffected. I mean, incredibly, last summer of cricket was barely affected. It was delayed until July, and once it started through July and August, it was a brilliant success of amateur cricket. And then beyond that, by September, hopefully everything will have sorted itself out. The big effects will be as to whether we lose a generation of talent and and not just talent, and people who enjoyed sport who think that it's easier to stop, because that happens a lot for amateur sport with long-term injuries. And although this isn't an injury that has the effects that it has on somebody's life, it also comes to the point where it's easier not to go back necessarily for a lot of people. So there'll be a number of problems in a number of areas. I've spoken about the RFU a lot, and the RFL for rugby league and rugby union after this. But there's so many areas where it'll be really hard to make sure they bring in the player base needed for all kinds of sports, all kinds of small sports that you were, touching on, Harry, and all other sports. And obviously the uni issue that I spoke about earlier, that comes back to all of this. Recruitment next season is going to be the big challenge, and hopefully, as a proud sporting university, Exeter is able to keep producing good results. Everyone will be affected, but next year's committees have got a lot on their plates.
Yeah, and I think it, like we've all been saying it, and we've said throughout this last half hour, 40 minutes, it's risk and reward at the end of the day. And if you're comfortable with doing it, 100% go for it. Get back involved with grassroots sports as and when you can. If you're not, that's absolutely fine as well. But like Elise said, that the emphasis then falls on the clubs and the committees to like extend that arm, if you like, and say, look, it's okay, we understand, and try and sit there and say, look, when you're comfortable, please come back, because we need you and we want you to be a part of this. And I think, like I said, whether it's uni sport, grassroots sport, even semi-pro up to pro sport at the end of the day, because all of these at the end of the day feed into that. That's what it comes down to, is keeping that idea of grassroots sport alive, because without it, you don't really have that talent pool that we've been talking about to create your next generation of stars for your individual sports.
Yeah, I think don't give up is the message, and go back to it when you can. I think that you touched on something that we actually haven't spoken about, that actually there are a lot of, even at our age, although it's hard to believe, there are a lot of vulnerable people that aren't able to go back, who aren't able to go back to sport. And I think it's really easy for them to feel isolated as well. So it's a good message to say, that it will end. There is a light at the end of the tunnel, and it will be good to have everyone back.
Yeah, and I suppose, like we said, that is obviously the message then, is keep holding out, it will get there, and these places will be open for you, these sports opportunities and these clubs will be there for you when they're allowed to be again. But as much as we're reliant on them, they're reliant on us as well to keep them going. And that's what it all comes down to at the end of the day, because you play sport for fun, because you love it. And there's that competitive edge, but you enjoy kicking a ball about, or passing a ball about, or hitting a ball about with your friends. And that's what it comes down to, for me personally anyway.
Yeah, I mean, it's absolutely key that people, do get it right in terms of bringing people back, and not expecting it to be easy, because it's not just, and it's obviously very difficult, people who have to shield, but it's not just those people that will be affected, and it's not just related to COVID, because it will come down to a number of things, a number of people who won't feel that they're physically in the shape that they were when sport was suspended, to be able to compete as they did, and I think a lot of people are going to turn up and be worse at the sport than they were previously, because it's grassroots, it's not pro. You don't keep training. So that'll be really interesting to see some of the passes in the first games back in September, grassroots rugby, and line out throws as well. Blimey, but I think it's I think it's just obviously clubs have got to make sure that they are very, very compassionate and sensitive with getting people back. But naturally, I think they will be, because they need to get people back. So I'm sure we will see that. And yeah, I think the only way is up. I mean, this last week, seeing the RFU cancel grassroots rugby and Bucks cancel, all seasons for term 1 and 2 sports has been very, very difficult to see for a lot of people, myself included. But I think going forward from here, I really do think light is at the end of the tunnel, as has been said already. So yeah, fingers crossed.
Well, I'm conscious that we're running out of time, and obviously Nick, you've got to get off and do some other stuff this evening as well. So we'll leave this one here. So Nick and Elise, thanks very much for joining me. To those of you watching, we hope you've enjoyed this, and we hope you enjoyed seeing a discussion and a debate about sporting topics in a slightly different format. And hopefully you'll stick with us as we get a few more of these up and running soon.